Imagine for a second looking out your window, but instead of, a typical street or a neighborhood, your entire nation essentially revolves around a single strip of concrete. What if an entire country was basically just an airport runway, right? It sounds completely made up, like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. But for about 11,000 people out in the absolute middle of the Pacific Ocean, this isn't fiction. It's just their everyday reality. Today, we're looking at a place that pretty much challenges everything we think we know about geography, the economy, and, well, survival itself.
So welcome everyone to this explainer. I am honestly so thrilled you're joining us today because we're going to unpack the completely bizarre daily life and the very real existential threats facing the micronation of Tuvalu. This place is just a giant puzzle of incredible paradoxes. We're talking ancient traditions colliding with Elon Musk's internet and a place where the joyful sounds of kids playing are, tragically, slowly being drowned out by the rising sea.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just to get our heads around the sheer scale here, Tuvalu's entire landmass is a whopping 26 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, JFK International Airport in New York, that's roughly 4 to 6 times larger than this entire sovereign nation. It's actually the 4th smallest country in the world, and it sits at a maximum of just 2 meters above sea level. It's this razor-thin strip of land where, I kid you not, in some places you can literally look to your left and see the vast ocean, look to your right and see the lagoon at the exact same time. All right, so here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start off with the runway nation, then explore life on the tarmac, check out how they're funded by the internet, confront the existential climate threat, and finally, look at their resilience at the edge. And don't worry, by the end of this, all these seemingly random threads are going to connect into one really cohesive story. Starting off with Section 1, the runway nation. Let's look at their isolation. So for years, Tuvalu has heavily leaned into this marketing claim of being the least visited country on Earth. And officially, their tourism numbers say they get about 3,000 visitors a year. But some recent visitors actually did the math, and it paints a slightly different picture. Fiji Airways, which by the way is the only airline flying there, recently bumped up its capacity to 5 flights a week on an ATR-72 plane. Now, if those planes are even, reasonably full, that's potentially over 14,000 visitors a year. Which means that surge of tourists ironically drawn in by that whole least visited label probably bumps them up the list. The true bottom spot? Actually, that might belong to Somalia now. But hey, as a marketing tool, you got to admit, it's absolutely brilliant. And because they're so insanely isolated, daily life there is just this fascinating study in contrasts. For instance, nearly every roof now sports a Starlink satellite dish. So digitally, they're hyper-connected. But physically, getting stuff is tough. You might literally find yourself shelling out $50 for imported Atlantic salmon at the local market, which is mostly stocked from cargo shipping containers. And culturally, it's deeply, deeply traditional. Get this. Every single day from 6:45 to 7 p.m., there's a mandatory public prayer pause. A bell rings, and if you're walking down the street, you actually stop walking and just wait for 15 minutes. Oh, and to top it off, they have absolutely zero military presence, just a small local police force handling the whole shebang. Moving on to Section 2, life on the tarmac. This is their totally unique hub. And this brings us right to the beating heart of the country, that international airport runway we mentioned. Originally built by the U.S. military during World War II, space on the island is so insanely scarce that this single strip of tarmac literally dictates the daily schedule. In the early morning, it's a pristine jogging track. Honestly, you might even see a couple of stray pigs crossing it. But midday, everything completely shifts. A loud siren suddenly echoes across the island. The local police drag out the traffic cones, everybody clears out, and boom, it is a fully active international airport ready for that Fiji Airways flight. But then, as the sun starts to set, and this brilliantly illustrates the sheer resourcefulness of the Tuvaluan people. Right at 5 p.m. every single evening, that same runway magically transforms into a massive national public park. Because it's quite literally the only large open space in the entire country, the whole nation is invited to just come out and play. You'll see these fiercely competitive games of soccer, volleyball, rugby, and this really unique local sport called piano. It's this beautiful communal event that happens daily on the exact same spot where a massive airplane just touched down a few hours prior. But the local quirks, they don't just stop at the runway. The whole country operates on basically 3 main highways. And honestly, knowing how to ride a scooter is practically a survival skill, because regular cars just don't fit well on the island. Also, their prison system, it's incredibly relaxed, almost Scandinavian in style. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 inmates at a time, and the front gates are often just left wide open. Inmates literally walk out to do jobs during the day. Diet-wise, locals thrive on traditional raw fish pulled fresh right out of the ocean. And here's a fun paradox. Despite being a deeply devout Christian nation with those strict prayer times, there's a massive daily public bingo game where locals gamble for a grand prize of up to $1,000 Australian dollars. No kidding.
All right, Section 3, funded by the internet. Let's talk about their digital wealth.
So, you might be wondering, how on earth does a nation with virtually zero farming, no major livestock, and a heavily cash-based society actually survive financially in the modern world? Well, the answer is a massive yearly revenue of $7 to $10 million. But wait, what are they exporting? Nothing physical. Literally nothing.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how that money actually flows in. You know how every country gets a 2-letter internet domain, right? The UK has .uk, the US has .us. Well, Tuvalu was randomly assigned .tv. And when the whole global streaming boom hit, tech giants suddenly realized just how incredibly valuable those 2 letters were. Today, massive companies pay Tuvalu big money for the right to use that .tv domain. It makes up roughly 10% of the entire nation's GDP. It's the ultimate digital paradox. These modern, high-tech streaming platforms out in Silicon Valley are directly funding a hyper-remote island nation that, just got its very first ATMs.
Which brings us to the heavy part. Section 4, the existential climate threat. Because sadly, all of this vibrant runway life and clever digital wealth is entirely overshadowed by a very sobering physical reality. You might actually remember seeing this incredibly powerful moment on the news during the COP26 climate summit. Tuvaluan Minister Simon Kofi delivered a speech, but not from behind some wooden podium in a dry, air-conditioned conference hall. He stood knee-deep in the actual ocean. He looked at the camera and stated, "We are sinking, but so is everyone else. We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow." He wanted to visually show the world that while global politicians sit around debating in nice suits, his people are literally watching the ocean water rise right up their legs.
And guys, this is not some distant future problem. It is happening right now. During the highest recorded king tides, the seawater doesn't just politely stay on the beach anymore. It encroaches directly onto that tarmac we were just talking about. Vloggers and journalists have documented kids running around playing soccer on the runway, literally splashing in ankle-high seawater, totally unaware that this very water threatens their entire future. In some parts of the island, the actual physical width from the ocean side to the lagoon side has shrunk to just 12 meters. Think about that. If you walk it, it takes exactly 11 steps to cross the entire width of the country. 11 steps.
So let's look at Section 5, resilience at the edge. How are they facing this future?
How does a community process the very real possibility that their entire country might just cease to physically exist? The response on the ground is this really fascinating split between hard science and deep faith. On one side, scientists predict that due to rising sea levels, Tuvalu could become completely uninhabitable, or even just disappear underwater entirely within the next 30 to 40 years. But if you actually go there and talk to the locals, you hear a totally different narrative. There's this deep, prevailing Christian belief that because God gave them this island, He's going to protect it, and it will simply never truly sink. Honestly, it is an incredible testament to human hope staring right in the face of raw data.
So the crucial point is that despite the faith that the island will remain forever, tangible, boots-on-the-ground actions are being taken on multiple fronts. Physically, the government is out there using giant sand sacks to desperately push back the water, essentially trying to reclaim their land piece by piece. They're also building these new, elevated housing projects, which are actually funded by Taiwan. However, geopolitically, reality is definitely setting in. Australia recently offered what's essentially a climate refugee pact, a real lifeline allowing Tuvaluans to relocate. And today, a staggering 80% of the local population has already applied for this permanent residence in Australia. So they're preparing for the absolute worst while still passionately hoping for the best.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound thought. Minister Kofi mentioned in his speech that the islands contain the mana, the deep spiritual life force and culture of his people. So if the sea eventually does reclaim that runway park, and the very last Fiji Airways flight takes off for good, what happens to a sovereign nation when it no longer has a physical piece of land to stand on? Can a country exist purely in the hearts of its people, dispersed entirely across the globe? It's a heavy question, not just for Tuvalu, but for all of us as we look to the future of our rapidly changing planet. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you on the next one.